Hello and welcome to another episode of Grammar and Thongs. Today we're going to be looking at fewer versus less. When to use the adjective fewer and when it is correct to use the adjective less, which is an area that does confuse a lot of people. But there's a simple rule to remember to make sure that you use it correctly. And that is to ask yourself this question. Can you count the thing that you're talking about? If you can count the thing that you're talking about, then in most cases, the correct word to be using is fewer and not less. An area where you'll see this used mistakenly all the time is in supermarkets, where you see this sign for the express lane. And you're standing there in the express lane and you look into the basket of the person in front of you and you can count the number of items in their basket and you can see that they definitely have more than 10 items in their basket, and it starts to really annoy you. Well, next time it annoys you, think at least I know the correct rule because I can count the items in their basket. So I know the supermarket has got it wrong, and grammatically speaking, it should be 10 items or fewer. So, can you count them? Use the word fewer. If you can't count them, if they're more of a singular mass noun, like a chunk of something that you wouldn't normally count, then that's when you use the word less. If you apply this to these examples, you'll see how it works. You can count dollars, so you would talk about having fewer dollars. But if you were talking about money in general, that's more of a mass noun, so you'd talk about having less money than somebody else. You can count the number of ingredients required in a recipe, so you would say fewer ingredients. But if you were talking about sugar, even though there are individual grains, normally we talk about it, it's not something you would normally count. It's like a mass, and so you would say you need less sugar in that recipe. If you were talking about friends, then you can count the number of friends that you have. But if you're talking about something that's not possible to count, like love, then you would talk about less love, not fewer love. So it's pretty easy once you know the rule. Of course, like with many things in English, there are some exceptions. And the two big ones are when it comes to time and when it comes to money. So, when you're talking about time, it's a bit tricky, but if you think about when we refer to time, we're really referring to that chunk of time rather than thinking about it in units. So if you were to say he wrote a novel in fewer than 4 years, well, that's counting it as individual units. So that would only be correct if he actually wrote the novel in 3 years or 2 years or 1 year. What if he wrote the novel in 3 years and 6 months? Okay, that is still less than 4 years, but it's not fewer units than 4 years. So that's why we use less when we're talking about time, even though it does seem to go against the rule about whether you can count it. He wrote a novel in less than 4 years rather than fewer. Same with money, the same sort of rule applies. The court handles cases involving fewer than 10,000 individual dollars, just doesn't quite sound right. And I suppose you could argue that it could be $9,900.50 or something like that. So here is another example where we use less, even though strictly speaking you can count the individual dollars. And it's because we're referring to that amount as more of a singular mass chunk. And so that's why we use the word less instead of fewer. So a couple of tricky ones that might still trap you every now and then, but if you just remember the rule and ask yourself, can you count them? Then hopefully you'll use fewer at the right time and less at the right time. Thank you.